Welcome to part 3 of the training videos on the KWIZ List Aggregator app. In this video, I will look at how to connect the List Aggregator to data from SharePoint Search and the Graph API. Let's start by connecting the List Aggregator app to the Graph API. Using the Graph API allows me to connect to data across Office 365. This includes user information, tasks, and files. Before you connect to the Graph API as a data source, you may need to perform an additional step. In the new SharePoint Admin Center, you may need to approve connecting to the Graph API. This is managed under API Management in the Admin Center. KWIZ have a knowledge base article detailing the steps involved, which is accessible from the Settings page of the List Aggregator. The Microsoft Graph Explorer is a great resource for you to understand more about the data returned by the Graph API. There are a number of sample queries, including all users in the organization. The Part 2 video on the Org Chart app goes into detail about how to connect to the Graph API. This includes the various options to select and filter data. In this video, I will use one of the samples provided by KWIZ to show my recent files. You can see in this sample that it connects to a path in the Graph API. It selects certain columns, and if I wanted to, I could apply certain filters. I can restrict the number of items to return. I can also add extended properties from the Graph API if my initial query does not return all the columns I require. As seen in the videos on the List View Plus app, I can set a custom CSS file or configure the persistent cache. On the second page, I can configure the columns retrieved, including friendly names and data types. If I edit a specific column, I can alter its friendly name or change the data type. If I want to display any of these columns in the data returned, I need to modify the table control in the app. That concludes how to connect to the Graph API. Now let's look at connecting to SharePoint Search.
As explained in the Part 1 video of the app, the SharePoint Search data source is typically used when querying data across multiple SharePoint site collections or the whole tenant.
I'm going to use the SharePoint Search data source type to return all tasks from across my different SharePoint sites. In order to do this, I need some understanding of the SharePoint query syntax. There is a useful link to give me more information. In my example, I want to return all the items where the priority column is high. I need to make sure I use the correct syntax and data values. The query relies on the column being mapped in SharePoint Search. At the moment, this will return data from any list or library with the priority column. I can restrict my results to one or more list types. I can also restrict results by content type. By default, results are limited to documents and list items. Similar results can be excluded. Next, I need to select what columns to return in the query. This is dependent on the columns being mapped as managed properties in Search Administration. In my case, I will use priority and task status, both of which are already mapped. If columns are not mapped, I must map the appropriate crawled property to a managed property. Returning to the List Aggregator app, I enter the managed property values separated by a comma. There is an additional step we will come to shortly to display these columns in the app. I can configure the search result source to use for my query. This could be the whole of SharePoint or just the current site. Once again, I can restrict the results to a maximum number, and I can restrict the results by search scopes. On the second page, I can once again configure the information for the columns I have selected. I need to add in the priority and the status columns I selected in the data source. I select the column internal name. Then I provide a friendly display name for the app and specify the data type. You will now see the columns are displayed in the app with the data showing all high priority tasks. If I wanted, I could further configure the app with filter, group, and paging controls. In this training video, I showed you how to configure the List Aggregator app to connect data from the Microsoft Graph and SharePoint Search. Thank you for watching this training video. If you need any further information, please contact QuizCom using the details on screen.